everybody, and welcome to our Fireside Chat about the behind the scenes of the Nightingale print magazine. I am Jill Brown. I'm the Programs Director at the Data Visualization Society, and I'll be moderating today's conversation, really going behind the scenes of Nightingale and digging into what it's like making a print magazine in the digital era. So just in case you're not familiar with the Data Viz Society, we were founded to serve as a professional home for those working across the data viz discipline, across the field, while leading others into this growing and dynamic industry. And so to increase the visibility and value of data visualization in the general public, we offer lots of events like this one, programs, matching with mentors and buddies, and lots of ways to connect with other data visualizers around the globe. So our mission is to connect data visualizers across tech stacks, subject areas, and experiences. And you can become a member of the Data Visualization Society at datavisualizationsociety.org. If you're a general or patron member, you can log in and submit questions to be asked during this fireside chat. So I'll post that link in the comments here in a minute. And so to kick off this conversation, I'm going to bring our Nightingale panel of experts on stage and go ahead and ask them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their background and what they do for Nightingale, and we can go ahead and get started. I am going to pass it first over to Jason.
Panel of experts. I don't know if that would be really how I would introduce. Well, my name is Jason Flores. I am not an expert in magazine publishing, although
well, you're an expert in this publication, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Sure. That's for sure. Hi, everybody. So Jason Flores here. I'm from New York. I was like in the top 10 first people that joined the Data Viz Society because I knew some of the founders, Amy and Elijah and Molly, and was really just super excited about being a part of an organization that could kind of share the practice of Data Viz in a different way. And then in particular, pretty much from the first day, I was really excited about what we could do with publications. So I'm also our publications director on the board of directors. Who's next?
Go for it, Mary.
Okay, I'm Mary Aviles. I'm managing editor at Nightingale, and I help out on digital imprint, along with Jason and Claire and Julie, who's not here with us today, but she's here in spirit. I agree with Jason's point where we have become better versed in magazine publication, but we would never call ourselves experts. In my day job, I'm a user experience researcher for a nonprofit education entity.
All right, and I'm Claire. I am the content editor, so I work closely with Mary to manage the day-to-day of Nightingale operations, but also focus a little bit more on finding new content, organizing our content into features and series, and figuring out what other fun stuff we can do, both on digital and print. Data Viz designer for my day job, came to that and the Data Viz Society in a bit of a roundabout fashion, as many people in data visualization did. Previously worked in policy analysis.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to have all of you here, and I'm really excited to pick your brains about making Nightingale what it is today. So for those folks who might be joining in and aren't familiar with Nightingale in general, can you explain kind of what Nightingale is as a whole? And then we'll dive into more of the transition from online to print. So Jason, it seems like maybe you want to start.
I was just being like the hand model, you know.
I love it.
I went with a more subtle background. It's like
you got your stack in the
background. Oh yeah, I know. Wait a minute. So, what was the question?
What is Nightingale?
What is
Nightingale? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Clearly, I'm in more of a silly mood today than an expert panel mood. So let's see. So, certainly my perspective, but a few years ago, before the Dataviz Society and to a degree Nightingale launched, publishing and writing about data visualization was just kind of a different thing, right? There were a lot of professional journals. There were certainly publications related to conferences, like you're giving a paper and this is the outcome of your research. There is Market Cafe Press, a great zine that was already in existence before Nightingale. But when it came to things like blogs, there were things like Towards Data Science, which featured a very, very much a data science focus on DataViz on medium.com, but there really wasn't that many, like a home, right, for like if you're going to publish. And my sideways entry into the DataViz field was through DataViz History research on W.E.B. Du Bois. And I didn't know where to publish my stuff, right, because it never fit anywhere. And so when the DataViz Society started, together with Elijah Meek, so one of the co-founders, we went to Medium. They were very gracious in helping us to stand up the first version of Nightingale and fund us for the first year. And in that first year, we basically just started figuring out what was even possible with Nightingale, right? Like, when even today, when I tell people I'm connected to Nightingale, a magazine about DataViz, they're like, well, what does that even mean, right? So like writing and trying to take a perspective on DataViz ethics and DataViz history and certain types of DataViz, trends in data visualization, to try to really create that discourse about everything that's possible in DataViz is really what our mission's been from day one. The other thing, and glad to pass it over to Mary and Claire, is that when we started, I didn't feel like I was really connected to a community of that kind of broader discourse. And I felt like it was really important for us to broaden not only what was being talked about, but who was talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so we've really tried to put a very, very conscious focus on inclusion and diversity, from skills, mindsets, global location, and everything else. So really trying to create a multifaceted community of people talking about ideas and trends in DataViz. So that's what Nightingale is in my perspective. Mary and Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I came into Nightingale as a writer as well, and had been through submitting articles that were about DataViz and about qualitative research, which really didn't fit really nicely anywhere. I'm not a Viz practitioner, but I often have to use a partner with Viz practitioners, and so the more like in real life stuff was more directly connected to my work. And we wanted, when I started managing editing with Jason and Claire, we really wanted to make it so that it was easier for people to submit. This isn't, it's sometimes when you try to submit to not even academic journals, but to other magazines and other digital sites, you have to jump through a lot of hoops, and it's a big formal process. And we wanted high quality content, but we wanted to make it easier for people to be able to share their ideas. And so that's what we try to do with the people who submit to us, to our writers.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is just we do work closely with our writers, and that was true for digital, that continued to be true for print, because we really do want to make sure that we're not just hearing from already established experts in the field, but we want to hear from new voices, people who are new to the field, people who may not speak English as their first language, because we are a global community. So we want to make sure that we can support people regardless of where they live or what language they speak. And so we spend a lot of time working with writers to make sure that we can bring their perspective into Nightingale.
So just to finish up and add on to what Mary and Claire also said, Nightingale is effectively a platform. Initially, it was on Medium. We moved into our own website, nightingaledvs.com, nightingaledvs.com. Can't we put that in the chat? And which we've run for about a year. And Mary and I, in 2020, announced that we would make a print magazine, and now we have published a print magazine. So in case you're under a rock and don't know what Nightingale is, this is what we are. We are a digital and print publication. So just to check all the boxes there, Jill.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more. So we talked about the digital experience really helping our global organization, give opportunities for people to publish, and regardless of how much experience they have, they can kind of get their work out there. So what was that transition like from going from digital to print? Where did that idea come from?
So I'll probably start this one and pass it over to Mary and Claire, because yeah, I mean, I honestly, from the very first day of the Data Viz Society being founded, I had this dream, like if we were able to create a viable digital publication and there was actually a community that came from it, maybe there would be the possibility of a print, some kind of print format. Going from digital to print seems counter to a lot of the trends, where more and more magazines who started in print are going to just digital. But we find it to be just a totally different experience. And so really focusing more on why you would make something in print and how you use it and how you keep it and how, like Mary has it in the background, not only because it's just something that she has, but it's something that she keeps near her, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a different thing. You can't do that with a website. And mm-hmm. so trying to find how different formats just create different relationships with our content. Mm-hmm. So that was always interesting for me. Claire, Mary, any thoughts?
I'll say that when, like, from day one of editing, Jason was like, so I want to do a print magazine. What do you think about that? And I was like, like, if you've ever worked with Jason, he has like so many ideas and limitless energy. So, it was like, I was like, yes, that's very exciting. I started my professional career in print publication, editing women's fiction. And so I was like, well, I'm kind of interested in that. But it seemed at that time like it was going to be next to impossible to pull off. And so just being able to like have it is like a tangible. This, is just, it's amazing.
Yeah. And for people who have been following along, it was more than a year-long process to get this first issue out the door, shipped to people's mailboxes. It was very much an idea that none of us had any idea how to do. So, it started off with some Google searches, how do you print a magazine? And like, how do you distribute globally? We knew that from the beginning that was going to be really important. We wanted to maintain the global audience of DVS. And so we wanted to make sure that we could ship the magazine to anyone, anywhere in the world. And none of us had any idea how to do that. And so just starting from questions, reaching out to anyone that we could think of who was involved in the publication business, asking Google, and just kind of figuring it out as we went along.
Mm-hmm. Hence the lack of expertise, more like the journeyman of so to speak, of Nightingale.
Well, and we had to fund it, right? And so like that was the other thing that seemed sort of insurmountable at the beginning, and actually really was, you all were, the community was so excited at the prospect. We were shocked at how successful the fundraising run went, and then we were like, oh, we usually have to do this thing now. Like, let's, okay, so we really, it was
dirt that we auditioned, right? This is the dirt.
Yeah. The aid, what comes first, the designing and the process, or the money and the designing and the process. And so there was a lot of that at the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's all kind of really interesting to think about, going from this big picture idea to making it concrete. And Claire, you started talking a little bit about the workflow and just like how to even start and get those questions answered. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about the process. Like, what was it like going from the text of an article to a magazine layout to something that you could, at some point hold in your hands?
Yeah, so that was actually really interesting. It took us a little bit of trial and error to figure out. And I'll say that Julie, who's not here today, but the creative director, I mean, she was instrumental. She designed almost every page of the magazine by herself. And she's brilliant. That's why it looks as good as it does. But it was a bit of a process. So we'd start with the text of an article. Some articles were existing. We wanted to highlight sort of the best of from the website. So things we had already published, but they needed to be edited down because it's very different writing for print and writing for digital. So things like you can't include links because it's going to be printed on a piece of paper. You also want articles to be quite a bit shorter than they are online and leave plenty of room for images, but it's harder to use inline images. So basically every article, even if they had already been published on Nightingale, had to be sort of reworked to fit the format. So Mary and I were doing that in collaboration with the authors. We do 1 or 2 rounds of copy editing, and then we would tell Julie, okay, the text is final. And at that point, Jason and I and some of our other volunteer editors would take the final text and plop it into InDesign. And at this point, we were not doing a whole lot with the design of the page. It was really just make sure all the parts are there. So the text is there, whatever images are there, and we would hand it over to Julie, and Julie would make it beautiful. And so we were doing 1 article at a time. So we just build up a folder of completed articles. And we were doing this for months, and it was the best part of the week. I don't know, I can't speak for Mary and Jason, but we would have our Wednesday morning meetings, and Julie would show up with about 5 or 6 new designs. And it was just so much fun to see what she had come up with in the past week.
Yeah, that was amazing. And actually, like we needed a creative director right out of the gate. And we needed somebody who was willing to take a chance on us because we didn't know how long it was going to take and what was going to be involved. And it was really hard to sort of scope out the need. And, Julie really, stepped up for us there because, that was obviously an instrumental role in this happening. And, and she sort of took a leap off the cliff with us, in doing that, which I thought, that was just really critical to kind of vaulting things forward. We can do all the planning in the world and prep, but without that piece, we would have been stuck.
I think the last thing that I would add on is that when we first started talking about making the print magazine, we were kind of unsure whether it would be like kind of a top-down or a bottom-up approach, meaning like do you start with a theme and then like put all the content behind it, or you start with like all the things that you like and then turn that into a theme? And so what's really interesting is that we thought a lot about like the flow of what a magazine is. You have kind of like light content in the beginning and then kind of main articles in the middle, and then some other kind of recurring features, and eventually like these reviews and things like that. I think that was really just established in issue 1. I think that we're going to be running with lots of those concepts for the flow across a single issue of the magazine in subsequent issues. So yeah, lots of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so you talked about having a creative director, you talked about considering flow and also flow of the magazine itself and also some of the workflow pieces. One of our members wrote in and asked, what were some of the most important things that you kept in mind while developing the print magazine? So some of the examples they gave were diversity of voices, unique reading experience. So can anybody speak to that?
So Mary, maybe you could talk about our community of editors.
Yeah, I was going to bring up both the editors and our content organization tool. We have a really active committee with folks that kind of come in and out and folks that stay constant, and we try to meet with them on a quarterly basis. And they're all around the globe, so as you can imagine, scheduling those meetings can be challenging. But folks have been really great about giving us input on, we vote. It's very democratic the way we run it, and so we vote on possible theme. We kind of source ideas and vote on possible themes. And we took editorial committee feedback on content that we had already published that we thought fit with the theme once we established culture as the theme. And we asked folks to interpret culture for us, which is why we included that at the beginning of the article of the magazine. And so they provide, we ask them these things like what should be in there, and so they kind of kept us kept us on, honest about in terms of things like, diversity of voices and translations and, just sort of considering things from a coalition perspective. Another sort of big vault forward I felt like was Jason developed a content organizing tool. That before that we had things kind of in one place, but the content organizing tool allowed us to take a landscape view of, and I should also just point out, like,
that was Claire. That was
me, but I wasn't going to say.
Usually
the credit. Claire's working on it.
Your tool, usually that's Claire or I, but like, okay. And so that gave us like this landscape view, and we were able to kind of look at it and say, okay, we have too much of this, we don't have enough of this. Like, it really did allow us to fill in some of the puzzle, look at it like in a kind of a puzzle piece perspective.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add with that is that we did actually shuffle the order of the magazine at the last minute, because we looked at it once Julie had compiled it into a single PDF instead of kind of article by article. And we realized that, the flow that we thought was going to work didn't actually work as well as we had anticipated. And so we kind of moved some things around and reworked a couple things. And so, I mean, it was literally up until the last minute that we were kind of tweaking the flow and just the way that all of the articles work together.
And maybe just as a final thought, like, the way we did this was just collaboration. We call it a community celebration. There was 98 people that contributed to the first issue. They're on like this big thanks page at the beginning. And honestly, the concept of collaboration is the reason that it looks and feels the way it is because there's not one of us that is responsible for anything. It was just this whole community effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it seems like quite the heavy lift. Can you talk a little bit about how that community coming together differs a little bit, or maybe it doesn't, from what you've been doing digitally for a number of years? Like, does the process look the same in terms of having that committee support and input and feedback, or was it a totally different experience?
I feel like we developed the process. We spoke about this a little bit in our retro article, because we didn't have a process. That was actually for me one of the most almost paralyzing experiences of the, we knew there were buckets of things we had to care about, like Claire mentioned earlier, in terms of distribution and, fulfillment and printing and design and all of that. But we were developing the process as we went along. And to Jason's point, a collaborative effort is fantastic, and that's why the magazine turned out the way it did, but it takes longer, especially with no process. And so we now know things to do better for the next time. So we really feel like we can compress our timeline now because we have some tools and process in place, and we've been through it once before, and we know what to expect. And we got a bit more organized as we stepped into this next one.
Yeah, I think the other challenge with process with print versus digital is on our website, we publish usually 3 days a week. And so we have just a steady stream of content coming in and being edited. And if one article falls behind, if an author needs more time, or if one of our editors isn't able to get to it right away, it's okay. We can just fill the slot with something else. And with a print magazine, we have to have it all ready at the same time. And so trying to keep all of those balls moving at the same time and make sure that, on the date that we had set to send it off to the printers, everything was ready to go. There's just a bit of a different process. Not the same steady stream of content, but just, fire hose, everything at once. It all has to get done on the same schedule.
So I want to try to add something here. I don't have my thoughts fully collected, so excuse if it's going to be a little rambly, but there's one of the things that Amanda McCulloch, our executive director, shared with us really early in the Nightingale journey was to really try to make sure that we spoke not only to the more fancy data journalism and more data art stuff, but really to like BI users, right? They're very different mindsets. There's very different types of practitioners in the data viz society. And it's actually that diversity of mindset that we are really trying to channel. And then we also totally want to flip it on its head, right? Like I tell people we made a fashion magazine for data viz, and they're just like, what? And they're like, yeah, actually you did, right? Because it's a lot more aesthetic. It's a lot more populist. We hope it's deep enough for people, but at the same time, it's very friendly. It's very designy. It's very colorful. And these are all ideas that we really tried to align on very early in the process. I think there's no better example of this than Kids Table, right? We had an idea, hey, let's do something for kids. And we wanted it to be fun. We wanted it to be for kids and their grown-ups. And what was, we actually launched the print version with Julie Krolik, one of our former directors, with this project with her son of counting their candy and their toys. But what's funny is that in the act of translating that from like an article that was a little bit, more dry on a digital thing to something that is, really for kids and has this colorful, vibrant, cartoony feel, that's a journey which is understanding who the people are in our community, but yet also really challenging their assumptions about what data viz can be. So a little rambling, but you get what I'm trying to go for, I think, maybe.
No, I think that's great. And I wanted to ask about the Kids Table and just overall inspiration for our Data Viz fashion magazine. I mean, what sort of sources did you draw on when you were conceptualizing, and then, kind of through the process when you were thinking about the design and totally restructuring the entire thing at the last minute? Like, where are those ideas coming from, and how did that work in your process?
We looked at a lot of source content. I mean, Jason, we all have, giant, shelves full of books and print material, and Jason and Julie, I would say, have a ton of magazine content at their fingertips. They do a lot of magazine shopping too, and like browsing. And so we were constantly sort of like measuring spines and looking at spines together, and then looking at sizing and like feeling the heft and looking at the paper types and holding them up to see if they were see-through. And I would say that perhaps Claire and I are more like, I have more book content. And so, then we were looking at book content, and we, all of us have kids, although Claire's little guy is more in the not yet reading the magazine.
No, he still just eats it.
Yeah. So we all have kids, and Jason and I have the experience of like, keeping your kids busy at the dinner table, at a restaurant or whatever, and like the kinds of activities and things kids like to do, and kid magazines and Lego magazine and stuff like that. So there was a lot of sort of life inspiration too.
Yeah, and the other thing that was really fun, in one of our really early meetings with the editorial committee, we had this Google Jam board, and we just asked people to drop in images that inspired them, that they thought would be a cool way to have a Data Viz magazine. And so people were, taking phone photos of whatever magazines they had at their house, or, finding images online and dropping it. And so we had this giant collage of a whole bunch of different images from our whole editorial committee. And that was kind of where we started. We built from there, and it was all these images, and they were really fun, and they were colorful and really bold and graphic. And so that inspired a lot of the design choices with the magazine.
Yeah, our Slack was full.
I really focus on like the business value of fun, like that comes from a very like businessy standpoint, but fun is like so important. And what we do as practitioners in Data Viz is help people connect with the subject matter we're trying to give them. And that could be a report for something more BI-ish. It could be something like National Geographic as like the two polls. But the reality is that we're just trying to grab people's attention. And that should be fun. I mean, that's like the best job in the world. That's why we do this, right? So there's no reason to try to take an overly serious tone with any of this. Like,
yeah, well, I think a great example of that is in the thematic gallery at the beginning of the magazine, where we're showcasing data viz that we thought related to culture. Jason pulled this together, and we've got everything from designer dogs to an org chart. And like, who would have thought an org chart would be fun? But it's so fun.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And we played with the kids table. We played around with we considered all different formats, and in future iterations, you may see it in different formats. And you know, at the end of the day, that we got to the point where it was like Julie just cranked that out. Just, you know, she like went into the cave and came back out, and it was like done, you know, and it was just amazing because we didn't really we hadn't landed on what the final format was going to be, and we didn't have time to decide. So she went in and came back out, and that's what it was, and it was perfect.
Oh, yeah. I mean, really, we can't index on how incredible Julie is. I mean, the Data Citron she's a global, she better be a global star after this, because she's really one of the best, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, while we're talking about the kids table, is that, you know, we're really proud of what we pulled off for this one, but we would love to do so much more. You know, Mary and I kind of started off this process having conversations with people who actually are experts in teaching data viz to kids and developing curriculum. And we would love to partner with people who are real experts in this space going forward. But for this first issue, it kind of had to come together at the last minute because of funding constraints, because of time constraints. You know, we couldn't give anyone information about what our timeline or what our budget was going to look like until we had done that fundraising drive. And so, you know, we were a little bit limited in what we could do this first time around, but we really, you know, we imagine it being something that's, you know, much more collaborative, that brings in partners in the education space, and that really draws on a lot of curriculum development best practices.
Yep. And our audience like our readers in digital love the kids data viz topic. It always does really well. And Claire mentioned something that I just wanted to underline too, is that this is something she does particularly well. I mean, we all have fairly busy full-time day jobs, right? This is something that we do as a passion project, and we often meet before work and at lunch, you know, and on the weekends and evenings, much to our committee's chagrin on the weekend aspect of things, because the weekend's really the only time we can meet. But we do a ton of legwork on, you know, and research, and, you know, Claire does a ton of reaching out and developing relationships with people. And that all is stuff that's very much behind the scenes, but is evidenced by the quality of what we put out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And yeah, I was curious about the kids table. I don't have kids myself, so it's not something that I was really even expecting. But I'm curious what feedback you've gotten on that, and if you've had folks who are working through the workbook with their kids and kind of are giving you that feedback on that particular component of the print magazine.
We know of at least one person whose partner used it in their classroom that we saw on Twitter, which is pretty cool. And we've seen people working at a few shots of people working on it with their kids. We're hoping to feature more of those. So if you are working on it with your kids, or with kids that you hang out with, and you have pictures, send them, because we will feature them in issue 2.
Or if you have your own activities that you do with kids to teach them data viz, send those in, and we'll feature those in issue 2.
Yeah, and I always say, like, well, how do I get involved in Nightingale? I'm like, the barrier for entry is so low. Like,
there is no barrier. No barriers.
All you have to do is just simply write to us at the email that's literally dripping from our website and magazine. I mean, it shouldn't be hard to find how to get in touch with us. And all you have to do is just simply write us back. You know, we'll pay you, we'll team you up with editors, we'll promote your work, we'll put it in print. I mean, it's a pretty good gig, I would think. I mean, that's what we're trying for. So Yeah, like we want to engage people, and we want to feature your children in issue number 2, right? That's what we're here for.
Or your dogs or your cats, but we just think the lack of an opposable thumb makes it a little harder.
It's right. It's a good point.
Yeah, well, and that leads me to another question about the print version, as a whole, just thinking about how you selected the articles. So you have, an online repository of lots of articles in Nightingale historically, and some of those you chose to kind of rework and print in the print magazine. Some of them are brand new. So can you talk through that process a little bit of selecting what goes in print?
When we started, my idea was that we really would only feature old content, because I was really much more thinking about the magazine being almost like a greatest hits of the digital. And so I think that when I even presented it to Mary and Claire the first time, I was just like, yeah, we already have the content. We don't need to make anything new. I think it didn't work that way. And I think that it's the wrong idea. I think that the other fact is that nothing that is in the print magazine is even remotely in the same format as it was digitally. I mean, almost everything's been edited so heavily that it's a different article or even just rewritten. Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah, maybe there's a few articles that were in their full form, but I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, the content selection started, as Mary mentioned earlier, with asking the committee of editors to sort of find their favorite pieces or pieces that they thought were particularly interesting or impactful that fit with the culture theme. And so we had just a long list. And then we started just kind of going through those and figuring out, because we knew we would need to change them a little bit, rework them a little bit, figuring out which ones we thought could be reworked in a way that would fit print. Some things, for example, you can imagine if you're talking about an interactive dashboard, that's going to be really hard to feature in print. And we did try with a couple of pieces, but it's much easier to rework something that's more text or static viz based. And then for the new content, it was brainstorming again with the editors, asking them what ideas they had for either subject areas or particular people or particular visualizations that they would like to see in the magazine. And we would just reach out. I mean, that's literally what we do. We just send a bunch of cold emails, Slack messages, Twitter messages, and luckily most people were pretty excited. And so when we asked them if they'd be willing to contribute something, they said yes. And so, for example, that's how we got one of our favorite features, which is Dear Nightingale with Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Posevec. We knew that Dear Data was such a popular phenomenon that we just reached out and said, would you be willing to create something specific for Nightingale? And they said yes. And they just went off, brainstormed, and came back with a super fun activity. And that was Dear Nightingale.
Yeah. And that was the same thing with Jeremy Singer-Vine. He's somebody that I followed for a long time, and we emailed him and he responded and he was really excited about it. And we knew our audience would love that. The other thing is that, as you can imagine, the three of us, we interact with these articles, with the content for the digital site very closely. So we all have ones that we read that really moved us. And so we brought those, into the mix as well. But there are folks who we've talked to or who have come to us and said, hey, would you consider letting, a piece by me for, issue 2? Yes. Just because we didn't reach out to you doesn't mean we don't want it. There's only 3 of us, right? So, if you think you have something, in the inspiration theme for issue 2, please reach out. Because like Claire said, we try to do a holistic job, but we're just, we can only go so far. So, we would love for you to reach out if you think you have something for issue 2 or a future issue beyond that.
And I think that that's also is kind of dovetails with this concept of creating a platform that's a hybrid between print and digital. right? I mean, at some point it became a joke that literally every page has a QR code on it, but that was really by design, right? Like we want the mediums to be fundamentally true to themselves, right? And so like the very first page is read the whole story, because as we said earlier, you can go to a GitHub or you can go to something interactive, or frankly see a data viz that has more data or detail than we can put in the print magazine. Like that's also something that we see as a strength, not necessarily a weakness. And it comes from starting with our legacy content of roughly 1,000 something articles at this point.
Yeah, I think that blending of the print and digital is super interesting, not only with the transitioning of some of the online content to the print content, but having that kind of exchange. And I'm curious if you've had feedback or if you have any way to kind of look at metrics or just see how many people are taking that kind of blended approach in reading the print version and then going to the digital kind of expansions of those articles.
We're definitely seeing a lift in daily web traffic. And so I think that we can attribute that to both the QR codes and the amount of promotion and excitement that's been happening related to the print magazine. And the other, I just wanted to mention back on the QR codes, like as Jason pointed out, we put them in there on every piece because it's so hard for us as editors to cut a piece down, to make it fit the magazine. And then you feel like, oh, but there's all this other stuff that was still in the original article. And we didn't want people not to read that. And then as Jason pointed out, we have this huge archive of digital content back from the Medium days. Not all of it's on the existing site. Most of it is, but not all of it is. And we don't want people to miss out on that who were just becoming introduced to Nightingale. We really wanted to give them the chance to go back and, discover some of the wonderful, digital archive that we had, if they were new or coming to us for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talked about a couple of the pieces that brought you all a lot of joy. So what was the most fun part of creating your DataViz fashion magazine, this beautiful piece of art?
I mean, it was definitely the Wednesday mornings when Julie would show new designs. That was just so much fun, getting to see the magazine come together piece by piece. Julie always blows away with the ideas she had and the illustrations that she made. But I think in addition to that, I would say something that was so much fun for me was getting to revisit all these articles. And, Mary and I read the magazine, I don't know, 1,000,000 times. And yes, there are still typos, we know, including a very important one that the submission date for content is actually August 31st. So please send in your stuff. You haven't missed the deadline. But getting to spend so much time with all of these articles, even the ones that, we had already read because they were already published online, just, knowing that we had read every single piece in the magazine and getting to experience all those articles and, learn so much again from reading these pieces over and over. I think that was fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm not a designer at all. And so I don't work often with imagery and fonts on a daily basis, but man, Julie had such great ideas for her fonts in there. I mean, and as you can see from the early viz, we did not hold back on the fonts. It's like a font party in there, So I always just thought those were so cool. And the way that she paired different fonts together that I would never have thought would go together, but looked so cool. And then also we worked with two other illustrators who we just, again, cold called, and they were both just delightful to work with. And those are always so great because you say, here's our idea and here's the piece, and they come back with this beautiful work, right? And so John Matta and Lan Trung were our guest illustrators, and that was fantastic. So those were fun parts for me.
For me, the most fun was just kind of seeing how like ideas go from, abstraction to working from home, ladies and gentlemen. Like ideas are just like, we had this idea where like, well, what if someone loses a kids table? And we're like, we should put a page in that just shows like the documents that in the magazine. I mean, I think we had that like 2 days before we went to
yes,
bed. Like
which you can imagine gave us all sort of a slight stroke. There were several of those things where, oh, here's some other pages we should make sure we add 24 hours before.
Yeah, we're like, we had no idea how are we going to end it. And like, we're like, oh, we should have like a checkout list of like the things you can do for next issue. Duh, and also we're like, hey, we should probably push advertising, like imagine that, like the core foundations for most magazines. And it would just be like, hey, on a Slack channel, like, hey, Julie, can you do something about like advertising on the inside cover? Yeah, cool. What's the text? Here's some text. And then like a day later, you would get this thing and you're like, holy cow, it's amazing. So I really love we actually got really quite fast when it came to going from idea to implementation. And the other thing I want to say is that we waited on the cover till very, very late in the process. And Julie presented a number of projects, of ideas, and they were very great. She's amazing, obviously. But then there was the egg, and we were just like, done. Boom. And also amongst the list things that she did were these data viz of the magazine. We knew about, there we go. We knew that we wanted to have data viz of the magazine at the beginning to help you kind of see it in a different way. And again, it just showed up at the last minute and you just kind of can't believe it. And you're like, wow. So, but again, I think last thing is on this most recent ramble is that you invest your time in people and then you collaborate on something and then you get to this point where the value of your collaboration takes on a certain momentum that makes this just really happen. And you've committed to that. And it's just like, so kids table, cover, the letter, things like this, they're just things that we just committed to. And all of a sudden they just took on they just became so much better than any one of us could have done individually.
Yeah, and I really love that every time, you ask somebody that, what's your favorite part of X question, the answer is almost invariably the people. The people are kind of what make things happen and make, huge projects like this, though overwhelming, like really enjoyable. So I always love hearing that because I think the community that we've created both in the Data Viz Society and then at a more granular level on the projects like this that we work on is just amazing to work with. So just a couple more questions and we'll let you go about the rest of your day. I am wondering what the most unexpected part of the process was. It sounds like there was lots of Googling and exploring, but kind of what tops the list as didn't think about that. That's interesting. Maybe we should do something about it type of moments.
We have many learnings about the postal carriers worldwide that we did not anticipate. I think Claire and I have become more ingrained in the fulfillment process than we ever thought we would be. So I think for those of you in the Netherlands, we're sorry. It's not our fault. It's your postal carriers. Something's wrong with the post office in the Netherlands. But so I think there's aspects of that. Our printer and fulfillment partners in Germany, and so we struggle to speak whatever the German version of Spanglish is with them, so that we can get things, German-English, so we can get things communicated. But they've been great.
I know. What about you, Claire?
I don't know. I was trying to think. There's so many. Jason, like you already mentioned the things like, oh, maybe we should say something about advertising. And, I feel like all of that, one example of this is with the kids table, we had all the articles in there. And then one of the very last pages we added on literally the last day was the intro page describing what the kids table was, and this is for you kids, read it with your grown-ups and do the activities. It's just one of those when you're so much in the middle of the weeds, when you're really down in the details, it can be hard to step back and look at the big picture and remember, like, oh, we need this sort of orienting text. I mean, that was true with the actual Nightingale magazine as well. Just like, what needs to be up front to orient people to the magazine, to how to use the magazine. So some of those things that I think, in some ways it would have been great to have a little bit more time. We were a bit rushed at the end, but we felt like it had already taken so long to get this out that we didn't want to push back the printing date anymore. But, trying to step back and look at those things like, okay, who's going to be using this? What information do they need? There were a lot of those.
But I guess that's part of the joy, right? Like, because the reason why we have this is not because we had a great idea, but because we had an extra page.
Well, that's true. That's the other reason.
Right. And this page, which I think is actually one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's just because you needed a certain number of even pages for the actual printing and binding of it.
Yes. Hence the expertise.
Expertise. But so I think the unexpected and the reason why I kind of had faith in us to figure it all out is that design is dealing with constraints and coming up with a solution as a result of those constraints. And those constraints just kept kind of manifesting themselves as we went, but they actually helped us to make ultimately better decisions in content and design as we moved forward. So we didn't know a lot of that, but it actually ended up being like the most fun part, I would say.
Well, also blowing through the first print run was unexpected and delightful.
Oh, yeah.
The speed with which we've been selling the reprint is also been lovely and unexpected. So get yours while you can. And then I think that, like, I knew I would be delighted when I actually had it in my hands, but I give the Klimt to thinking about it. Like, it's just like, every time I see it, I'm just like, people come into my house and I'm like, oh, have you seen this? Like,
yeah.
I'm showing this. Let me get the one out of my car.
Yeah, it was great the day it showed up. So Jason was the very first person to hold Nightingale magazine in his hands. Dunno. We thought people in Europe would get it before we did in the US, but somehow it made it to Jason first, which is pretty perfect. Yes. But we were all on Slack watching him, his unboxing video, cheersing with, drinks and celebration. It was a great moment when we had evidence that the magazine was actually made and in this world.
Yep.
Okay, so working like the day job and all this stuff and dealing with all this stuff, working with my wonderful colleagues on things, and then all of a sudden I get a text message, the box is downstairs. So like I run downstairs and I grab the box and I'm like, yeah, work people, I gotta leave, I gotta grab this box because it's like going crazy. And then my wife was like, we gotta go pick our son up from this other place. So then I'm just like making that video, the unboxing video, basically knowing that we're late to pick up my son, right? So kind of a little weird, awkward. And then the picture of me holding the magazine on the street in New York, I was in the middle of a red light. And I was like, oh, that's a good view. So like, I didn't even think, we'd never even announced the cover before.
Right.
Right. And it just, all these things just kind of happened. And like, I was just like busy and just completely not thinking about any of that. And it just worked out like in this, I don't know, clandestine way. And you're just like, wow, that was fun. It worked.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love it. And I love all of the Nightingale and print pictures on social media that when people have gotten their own, hard copies, which has been really fun to watch as well.
Very much, again, not only shows the team effort on how we have promoted Nightingale, but also the team effort from the community and how they wanted to show that they were a part of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So really, again, see that as like really one of the foundational aspects of the whole thing.
Yeah, I love it. Well, one last question before we sign off for the afternoon. So any lessons learned for issue 2 or anything that you want to say about what's coming next for the next issue?
Yeah, so issue 2, the theme is inspiration. And I think to the question of, what are we going to do differently? What are we going to change for issue 2? I would actually put that back on the DataViz community and say, we want to know what you would do differently for issue 2.
I like it.
We actually, we love all of your feedback. Tell us what you want more of, what you want less of. We also have a survey about where you find inspiration or what you've created based on inspiration, and that will help inform and be used in issue 2. So please take the survey. We would love to hear about inspiration from you. But
boom, look at that in the chat. Boom.
Awesome.
Magic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Magic.
Yeah. We have, we have seriously figured out our submission guidelines in a way that we didn't quite have that figured out last time. So if you want them, you can find them on nightingaledvs.com, because under our submit articles, we now have print and digital guidelines separately, which is lovely. And we're well into the collection of material for issue 2. Number one thing we learned was we have to have a hard deadline. So hard deadline it is. So
August 31st.
August 31st is our hard deadline. So if you have something, get it to us now, because we're going to ship by Halloween, by August 31st this year. It's going out. So it's happening. It's done. We've said it. It's in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Like I think I have this. I'm ultimately a very impatient person that has learned how to be strategic with my impatience. And I keep thinking like, we'll do this thing and, all this other stuff will happen. But what I always kind of realize anew every time is that making the first issue of Print Nightingale just means like, we're just starting, making the digital version, we're just starting, and so there's so many more things. The possibilities just keep getting more and more broad with every kind of new step that we've made. Having more subscribers gives us a little bit more funding so that we can do more with the content, reach out to new people, expand our community. At the same time, it creates a lot more logistical challenges, right? And so this is, again, just this kind of ebb and flow of what the possibilities are and how you adjust to the constraints. We printed and shipped and fulfilled everything out of Germany this time. I would say that it's pretty certain that we're not going to do that on issue number 2. So that's something that we've learned. But there will be other opportunities. There'll be other possibilities for us to explore in issue 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. So yeah. It's fun. It gives us a lot of energy, as you can tell. There's a lot of unknowns, and we like it that way.
Yeah. Definitely feel better prepared this time through, I'll say. I feel much less anxious.
For what it's worth, Mary never shared that the initial conversation on print gave her a heart attack.
Well, this conversation has been very lovely. I appreciate all of you taking the time to answer all of my questions and the questions from the community. I put a bunch of links in the chat, so hopefully people will find Nightingale if they haven't found it already, or engage by submitting or completing the survey. So thank you all for your time today, and we're going to sign off, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Great to talk with everyone. Yes.